In February 2025, Trump signed an order establishing refugee status for white South Africans, specifically Afrikaners, who are the white ethnic group of South Africa. I'm going to go over the history of Afrikaners, why they have declared themselves refugees, the controversy surrounding these events, and what this means for the marginalized groups of the United States and allies alike. So stay tuned. In the meantime, you can support me by giving me a like and a follow. White South Africans encompass all people of European descent in South Africa. White Afrikaners are a specific ethnic subgroup. Afrikaners are descendants of primarily Dutch, German, and French settlers who arrived in South Africa during the colonial period. They developed their own distinct culture and language, which is Afrikaans, and were the primary architects and beneficiaries of the apartheid system that institutionalized racial segregation and white minority rule from 1948 to 1994. The Afrikaan culture and language has been the subject of much controversy, debate, and study throughout South African history. Now, South African apartheid did not come to an end because the majority of the white people came to see it as unjust and immoral to segregate and oppress the South African people. Rather, it ended due to a combination of resistance from the South Africans, international pressure and economic sanctions, and the leadership of figures like Nelson Mandela, who fought for decades to achieve racial equality and democracy. However, today many Afrikaners acknowledge this difficult history and work actively towards reconciliation and equality in South Africa. While Trump's executive order specifically mentions Afrikaners, the broader discourse often conflates all white South Africans together despite their diverse cultural backgrounds and historical experiences in South Africa. It is Afrikaners who are primarily claiming refugee status and being admitted to the United States under the new executive order. So, some Afrikaners claim that the end of apartheid led to discrimination against white South Africans, particularly regarding policies aimed at addressing historical inequalities. These claims primarily focus on affirmative action programs and land reform initiatives designed to address the economic and land ownership disparities stemming from the apartheid era. Some argue that race based policies meant to correct historical injustice and inequality amount to reverse racism and threaten white lives, arguments that mirror opposition to affirmative action and DEI initiatives in the United States. So, this should sound familiar to us in the United States. The white South Africans are citing concerns about land reform laws and demographic changes. Since apartheid ended in 1994, South Africa's white population percentage has declined due to lower birth rates among white South Africans, immigration, and growth in other demographic groups. So their minority status has become more of a problem to them. While white South Africans face changes in political and economic structures, claims of systemic discrimination are often overstated by certain groups and media. South Africa's challenges, like crime, inequality, and political tensions, affect all races, with historically disadvantaged groups facing the greatest impact. Claims of anti white discrimination overlook ongoing advantages from the apartheid era. White South Africans maintain higher rates of land ownership, better education access, and greater wealth, with higher average incomes and lower unemployment rates. So, whatever the problem is for some Afrikaners who are having hard times, it's not race based. White religious leaders in South Africa, including international organizations and South African church leaders across races, dispute and reject these claims of anti white victimization and discrimination. During his first time in office, Trump directed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to investigate claims about farm seizures and violence against white farmers in South Africa, despite these claims being previously debunked. Experts strongly rejected these assertions, characterizing them as harmful misinformation. And a former U.S. ambassador to South Africa criticized Trump's statements as dangerous and misleading, suggesting they promoted white supremacist narratives. International organizations and human rights experts have consistently found that these claims do not meet the legal definition of refugee status, which requires well founded fear of persecution. Statistical evidence shows that white South Africans continue to enjoy relatively high living standards, significantly better economic outcomes, and constitutional protections of their rights. So, the narrative of white South African persecution has been amplified by far right media outlets and politicians globally, who often use it to advance anti immigration rhetoric while simultaneously supporting immigration exceptions for white populations. So we're seeing systemic racism at work. right now in front of us. Through an executive order in February of 2025, the administration established a new policy granting refugee status to white South Africans, particularly focusing on the Afrikaner community, citing the Expropriation Act 13 of 2024 as justification. The presidential statement outlined intentions to welcome those claimed to be experiencing discrimination. This move has faced significant opposition, with both government officials in South Africa and various religious organizations, particularly white church leaders, including Anglican representatives, firmly disputing any claims of systemic discrimination against the white South Africans. According to the White House statement, the Expropriation Act 13 of 2024 threatens property rights of white South African farmers and follows what they characterize as discriminatory policies in employment, education, and business. The statement claims these policies, combined with alleged government rhetoric, have led to increased violence against white landowners. Let's look over the Expropriation Act 13 of 2024. The Trump administration's interpretation of the Expropriation Act 13 of 2024 is incorrect. The act replaced the 1975 apartheid era law to align with demographic principles, providing a framework for property expropriation with fair compensation. Here are some key features of the Expropriation Act 13 of 2024. It applies equally to all South Africans, focusing on public interest. It requires just and equitable compensation under the Constitution, includes procedural safeguards and appeal rights, only allows expropriation for public purposes or addressing historical inequities. The Expropriation Act does not specifically target any racial group. Instead, it aims to address historical land inequities while ensuring constitutional property right protections. Here's why land reform matters in South Africa. Currently, white South Africans, which are 7% of the population, own about 75% of the land. Black South Africans own only 4% of the land. The imbalance stems from apartheid-era policies that forcibly took land from Black South Africans and restricted where they could live. The law ensures fair compensation for property, with adjustments possible only in specific cases, such as properties acquired through apartheid-era state subsidies or those held purely for speculation. Furthermore, the Act emphasizes negotiation and agreement between parties before any expropriation can occur. It requires extensive consultation, fair administrative process, and provides multiple avenues for legal recourse. Afrikaners who claim refugee status generally cite three main arguments, though these claims have been disputed by experts and fact checkers. So they claim economic concerns. Some claim that affirmative action policies and Black economic empowerment, known as BEE, programs unfairly disadvantage white South Africans in employment and business opportunities. Land reform fears. Despite the Expropriation Act's legal protections and compensation requirements, some Afrikaners express fears about losing farmland through land reform initiatives. So it's a fear of what will happen or what could happen. They also express safety concerns. They make claims of targeted violence against white farmers, but crime statistics show that violence affects all South Africans regardless of race, with Black South Africans experiencing higher rates of violent crimes against them. Upon taking office the second time around, Trump implemented significant restrictions on immigration and asylum processes. His administration severely limited refugee admissions through policy changes that effectively suspended much of the refugee resettlement program. This included halting the processing of numerous pre-approved refugee cases and restricting entry for asylum seekers from multiple countries. These changes particularly impacted people from nations like Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, affecting the immigration status of hundreds of thousands of individuals already residing in the United States. Then, on May 11th, the first group of 59 white South Africans left for the U.S. under the new refugee status. The decision has faced significant backlash, with critics noting that white South Africans generally maintain high living standards and considerable wealth accumulated during the apartheid era, rather than facing genuine persecution. a South African judge has explicitly dismissed Trump's claims of white genocide as imaginary, while many observers view this policy as a calculated political maneuver designed to appeal to Trump's base and inflame racial tensions. The treatment of white South African refugees compared to other refugee groups reveals a concerning double standard. Most refugees fleeing from war zones, natural disasters, and persecution face long waiting periods and strict entry requirements. However, this specific group is receiving expedited processing, breaking from normal humanitarian practices. The current administration immigration policies show stark contradictions. While ICE detains documented immigrants, such as green card holders, and the government considers revoking birthright citizenship, white South Africans who don't meet traditional refugee criteria are being granted refugee status. This gives them access to benefits, housing assistance, and work permits, even as legitimate asylum seekers from war torn regions struggle to enter the country. Throughout American history, immigration policies have often favored European immigrants over all others. Today, we're seeing this pattern continuing. The government is making it easier for white South Africans, of all people, to enter the U.S. as refugees, while making it harder for people fleeing from wars, violence, and disasters in other parts of the world. Administration officials like Stephen Miller, a known white nationalist, have played key roles in shaping current immigration policies, which critics argue show concerning biases in how different refugees are treated. Stephen Miller serves as Trump's deputy chief of staff for policy and homeland security. Media reports and leaked correspondence from 2015 to 2016 revealed Miller's promotion of white nationalist ideologies through his communications with Breitbart editors. The majority of his documented emails focused on immigration and racial topics, often citing discredited theories about demographic replacement, i.e., the white replacement theory. His policy positions have aligned with restrictionist immigration views, including support for historical policies that limited immigration. Miller has faced criticism for promoting content from white nationalist publications. As a senior advisor, he notably prevented the release of research showing that refugees have a positive economic impact. His connections extend to prominent figures in white nationalist circles, such as Richard Spencer, who organized the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. In a significant move, the Episcopal Church announced Monday it will end its decades-long refugee resettlement partnership with federal government, citing moral opposition to resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa under Trump's recent refugee classification. Bishop Sean W. Rowe explained that this decision aligns with the church's commitment to racial justice and its historical ties to anti-apartheid leaders like Archbishop Desmond Tutu. While the Episcopal Migration Ministries will continue supporting existing refugees, it will terminate its federal grant agreements by September. This announcement comes amid broader concerns about the administration's refugee policies. While most refugee admissions have been frozen, Afrikaners are being fast-tracked for entry. Church World Service and other faith-based organizations have expressed frustration, noting that other refugees in desperate need of resettlement continue to face significant barriers to entry. Make no mistake, we are living in deeply concerning times, where immigration policies are increasingly being shaped by racial preferences rather than humanitarian needs. There are serious concerns about this policy and its implications. It sets a dangerous precedent by using refugee status as a tool for racial politics rather than humanitarian aid, while reinforcing harmful narratives about white persecution that undermine racial equity efforts. The rapid processing of these cases, particularly when compared to refugees fleeing actual war zones and persecution, clearly demonstrates systemic racism in immigration policy. This approach not only emboldens white nationalist movements, both domestically and internationally, but also diverts crucial resources and attention from genuine refugee crises affecting vulnerable populations worldwide. It undermines the credibility of legitimate refugee claims and the international refugee system. These developments point to a troubling shift where refugee and immigration policies are being shaped by racial preferences rather than humanitarian needs or international law. For people who aren't white, and allies concerned about these developments, there are several ways to respond. You can support organizations advocating for comprehensive and equitable refugee policies, engage with local refugee resettlement organizations that assist all refugees regardless of origin, contact elected representatives to voice concerns about discriminatory immigration policies. Join or support civil rights organizations working to challenge biased immigration practices. Build community solidarity networks to support affected communities and amplify marginalized voices. And support anti racist efforts. During these challenging times, it's important to remember that collective action and sustained advocacy have historically been effective in challenging discriminatory policies and promoting more equitable solutions. We cannot lose hope. It may be time for a renewed civil rights movement. Show up.